on it.
Inorganic?
No. Then it makes it inauthentic.
For sure. So hello and welcome back to another podcast from the Celluloid Misfits.
We are the two Poofs.
We
Mark.
are two Poofs in the podcast. I am George from Movie Misfit. This is Mark from @head.over.reels. And today we are going to talk about women in action in film, obviously.
In film.
Obviously, as two gay men, we don't really care for seeing women in action as much as the red-blooded straight man. But yes, what's your title for this one, Mark?
So this is Handguns, High Kicks and High Heels. Women in action through the decades.
Through the decades?
Through the decades.
Or through the window?
Through the decades, preferably. Well, a lot of them have gone through the window,
so
I've seen.
Yeah, it's very true.
Yeah.
So we're going to jump from, obviously, women in Hong Kong cinema to women in Hollywood.
Yeah, just be an organic conversation and we'll go back and forward through the decades. We don't need to necessarily cut it down decade by decade. That would just be too difficult.
But yeah, there's a lot. I mean, the thing that is the thing. This could be a month's worth of podcasts.
On women in action?
On women in action.
I agree, yeah.
Just even from one side of the globe, never mind all over. But yeah, so how would you like to start? Who would you like to...
Well, we don't need to talk about anybody in particular at first, but maybe just...
Well, I mean, okay, well, let's...
Talk about
how much of a highlight it is.
Well, how much of a highlight it is, but I suppose the first place that we should start, George, very intently staring at you now, is why it's so relevant to talk about women in action today.
Well, today, I mean, it's odd that we need to even bring that up today, considering how long they've been in action. Yeah, it's a very odd question. I mean, relative, obviously.
It's a relative question, but it's a strange one. I know it's a strange way to open it, that people would need to actually have a conversation as to why they would need to, why that needs to be a topic, why women in action need to be a topic rather than just action heroes.
Well, yeah, I suppose
it's the fundamental...
In my side of things, in my sense, where I've nearly almost spent 40 years watching, obviously, women in Hong Kong movies kicking ass.
Yeah. And really kicking ass.
Really kicking ass, and for me, better than anyone in the world, to be honest, in the world of cinema. I find it very difficult to think why people still have a problem today of seeing women in action. Now, I know we do see it more so in the likes of the Marvel Universe and Wonder Woman. But there's still...
superheroes.
As superheroes, yes, they're specific characters that they're based on, but you just don't see a straightforward kind of police thriller, action thriller, where women today are given a role, much as Michelle Yeoh would have had in Royal Warriors, or Cynthia Rothrock pulled off for a couple of decades there.
But I think that's the fundamental of where you start with a conversation like this, is that if you go back over the years, especially as are we Western? I suppose we would be considered Westerners.
Of course we are, yeah.
Even though we're in Northern Ireland, we're kind of in the middle between the East and the West. We're kind of in that mid spot.
We're the place where aliens never attack and no natural disaster will ever happen.
They just were like, there's no point because, But whenever you kind of look at it from the perspective of why talk about women, when you grow up in a place like where we have grown up, what we have been used to is seeing men dominate the action film.
Oh, without a doubt.
And would people have been as receptive in the Western world to have seen a tough Joanne McClane running through a building, cutting her feet, running through air ducts? In 1989, or 1988, whenever that film was released, Die Hard, which I'm referring to, would they have been more receptive to it? No. Today it's becoming more common because, as you said, it's almost like a Western thought that it's not acceptable for women to be tough unless they have superpowers, unless there's some fantasy element behind it or whatever.
Yeah, totally.
Now, while I say that, that's not fundamentally the only reason that we ever see women
no, it's not.
We've seen Western women do it, but because that's where we see it, and that's and Hong Kong cinema is, I'm going to say, a niche market in the Western world, because it is really...
Well, yeah, I mean, even today,
there's a massive
still after
fan
all this
base.
time.
But
unfortunately,
people, so, you know, me bringing up that question, why is it important to talk about women in action? Why does that have to be the topic of conversation, and why does it necessarily have to be about women? Is because I think women, that this oppression of women, especially in the West, is being broken down gradually over the years. And within cinema, women are being given as much an opportunity now to showcase a variety of skills outside of the kind of housewife or the drama. You know, a lot of actresses that we see in the West, you know, that are successful are primarily women that do romantic comedies or family dramas, things like that there. Or if they have been in action, they've been put on television.
Yeah. You'll find that more so on television.
Yes. You know, you would have seen, particularly coming through, I mean, so to go back, you know, the first kind of action, I think, not action star, but kind of like the first time that people maybe took action seriously in the West, with a woman taking a lead role, would probably be a Policewoman with Angie Dickinson.
Yeah, well,
you know, popular television show in the 70s. Yeah. You know, we had Charlie's Angels.
Cagney and Lacey.
We had Cagney and Lacey coming a little bit after, kind of late 70s, early 80s.
I suppose, yeah.
You know, so it was starting to grow on television, but it wasn't reflecting the cinematic experience. So it was acceptable for people to watch these women on television being what they were. You know, Angie Dickinson playing a police officer who was tough. Yeah. She was abrasive. She
was in control.
She was in control. But the common factor within all of those things, not so much in Cagney and Lacey as it was much more straightforward. That's what I wanted to say. Crime procedural, like we would know today. Yeah. But with Charlie's Angels Policewoman, they utilised their sexuality.
Yes.
And I think that almost made it acceptable for us to see women in action, because it was like, well, they can't just be tough. Well, they have to use their femininity and their bodies.
But that was a very Western thing.
Yes, this is what I mean.
At the same time period, and a decade before that, in the East, women were seen as the major leads and heroes of film, because they were out there kicking ass and cutting people down.
Yeah. One that kind of jumps out to me at that time period is Chang Pei Pei.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Would have been Shaw Brothers at that time.
There was some before her, yes. But yes, she was definitely, and has proven to be, one of the best and most recognised faces of that time. And that was because she got some incredible titles at the start of her career that really did launch her. And she was beautiful and she moved well, you know. But, you know, for me, I think, in terms of the West, I think even the likes of when Sigourney Weaver played Ripley, that's a moment for me I remember where adult men, because I was obviously much younger when that came out, were shocked and surprised, but loved the fact that this woman was... Now, for me, there was she didn't leave an impression, because I was already watching, as I say, women doing 1,010% much more than what she was, just punching a guy out or shooting up an alien. Yeah. But for me, it was... I'd already seen all that. But for the West, it seemed to be like a big thing that she was suddenly...
But you just touched on my point that I made, is that there had to be a purpose for her to be tough. So she had to be facing off against something abnormal that you wouldn't face in real life for her to be considered an action star. And the first film, you know, in that, a lot of people are like, Ripley's tough. And the first one's a horror movie. If you look at it, it's very much a slasher film with an alien. You know, you have a final girl, you have Ripley kind of losing her entire crew to this ominous force, and then having to get out. She's kind of like, I don't know how to fight this thing. I don't know how to fight back. I have very limited availability in terms of weapons, and then whatever. She has the flamethrower and stuff. Yes. But she doesn't know what she's dealing with. The whole purpose of that first film is for her to get the fuck out of there.
Yeah, of course,
Whereas in the second film, she's much more... Time has moved on. She's been in cryo sleep. She's moved on. Her daughter's
ready to kick ass.
She's ready to be like, I'm ready to put these motherfuckers down. And I'm ready to get the guns out. And I'm ready to, you know... blast some bad aliens into it.
That's true.
That's what I'm saying. Why did we need that? As much as it makes for a sensational film, Alien is one of my favourite franchises of all time. did we need that to really make it acceptable for her to be tough? That's what...
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that is... Yeah. That is very much a Western way of thinking, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
The oppressed woman in movies, and the victim, and the sex object.
Mm-hmm. And you did have tough women going back, so not necessarily in action, but if you look at old gangster films, and you know, those films, you know, with James Cagney, you know, those old gangster movies, and even old westerns, what you were saying were tough Western women who they were tough in the respect that they could maybe hold a gun, or that they could maybe, you know, they tried to defend their land, or with Cagney they were femme fatales. But again, that's using sexuality, that's manipulating men, and that is how women have been thrown out into the public by this mass media that is Hollywood. That they've been thrown out there, that they have to be sexual beings, that they have to be mass manipulators. And then it all goes back to the whole Adam and Eve thing. You know, Adam was this kind of, he was living quite a normal life. Eve comes along and she's too tempted by the snake and the fruit. You know, she brings it. So, you know, it does kind of go back, although I'm not a religious person, it does go back to that whole biblical sense that it was Eve that kind of birthed almost kind of temptation, sexuality, manipulation, shame, all of those things. But you've seen it in, as I say, in those films, but it was always driven by they could never just punch a man. It wouldn't have been acceptable. They had to be smarter. They had to be sexier. They had to use what they had because they were oppressed in that time as well. You know, whenever those old films were being made, I mean, although women were very popular in film, they were only popular really because of how they looked and how they...
they were either seen as the wife or part of a musical number, or, you know...
And unless the film was Gone with the Wind, you know, with Scarlett O'Hara, you know, you didn't really see tough women. Such action
characters as such. So when for Hollywood, then when would that really have started? Now, granted, American cinema was very independently driven for a long time.
I suppose, especially when the 70s came in, you had the birth of John, not the birth, he had existed as an actor, but John Cassavetes, he was kind of he's the grandfather of independent cinema. And what he did, of course, with his films was give women, particularly, especially Jenna Rowlands, who he was married to, he gave them an awful lot more. He gave them an opportunity to be people, which was not something that had been seen in kind of these bigger budgeted Hollywood films, you know, these epics that they had been so used to making up to the 70s. Because we were seeing Gone with the Wind, Raintree, County Quo Vadis, The Ten Commandments, all of these huge films getting released. And then it was kind of like, women can move now from oppression into reality, and we can show women as people. And that's what Cassavetes did with films like A Woman Under the Influence, dealing with mental health and alcoholism in women. Opening Night, dealing with the pressures of being an actress.
I know. There was definitely, you know, I remember watching a lot of those older movies, and there was a lot of strong women.
But that was the kind of birth of independent cinema. That's what I'm getting at. So, because I thought that was quite but it was like, so that was that kind of birth of independent cinema, and then through that came a lot of other young independents who then were able to make films on a low budget and make them how they wanted to make them, and start bringing in tough women. But the thing about independent cinema was that in the West, to make an independent film with a woman in a role that seemed abnormal to the culture was not common. So the independent cinema of the 70s and the 80s weren't bringing women into action roles in the Western world because people wanted independent cinema to be deeper. They wanted it to be much more about humanity and trials and tribulations and the consequences of actions and, you know, mothering, you know, love, all of that kind of stuff. We weren't really seeing in the West any real women stepping into, on the big screen, action roles really until the 80s. And that was with Ripley in
Yes.
Aliens and Alien 3 Resurrection, whatever.
Yeah.
Sarah Connor in
Yes,
Terminator.
of course. Who seems to be highlighted much more as the kind of the first female action
Yeah.
heroine.
But it's
as
funny,
such,
again, here are two huge directors, Ridley Scott and James Cameron, bringing in two tough women to cinematic audiences in a very unique way. So that what Cameron and Scott did was they brought in tough women in a way that maybe felt a little bit more accessible to a wider audience, because they weren't just seeing a woman kicking ass.
Yeah.
It was like she had to be dealing with a force,
Of course.
to build up her kind of stamina, her confidence.
Yeah.
So we see that with both the first Terminator film and the first Alien film, where they are both women really on the run from something.
Of course, and then pushed to the
edge.
Yes.
Whereas when they came back for the sequels,
Yeah.
Terminator 2 Judgment Day and Aliens respectively, they were gung-ho. They were ready. We've seen Sarah Connor, she was muscled up in Terminator 2. She was shooting guns. She was like, taking no prisoners.
Yeah.
We're done here. Same with Ripley and Aliens. But it had to be that. It had to be, how can we get women into an action role, but make it that people won't be like, there's no way a woman could do that in real life. Whereas in Hong Kong cinema,
in Hong Kong, you had a decade earlier two women who were just out there policing the streets, coming across a murder case or something and kicking the shit out of somebody, or diving off buses or her explosions. It's fascinating to think that it took Hollywood that long. I mean, look, I'm going to be honest. I can't even imagine or think of any Hollywood female star or movie that still can highlight today what Hong Kong was doing with their female action stars in the early 80s in terms of modern action. Obviously, we know the swordplay movies and the kung fu movies, that they were always there. And even then, we're doing much more amazing things physically than what Hollywood has given. But yeah, I mean, it's like, such a different
time. You know more about Hong Kong cinema than I do. I'm learning, as we become friends, and I've always been fascinated in martial arts films and things like that there, because I just love action in general.
Yeah.
But really, and that one of my favourite kind of, I suppose, action stars is, her name's now left me, female prisoner Scorpion.
Oh, yes.
What is her name?
Grab it.
I am going to grab it. Totally.
Grab it and see. We've forgotten her name.
Michael Kaiji.
Yes.
Michael Kaiji was my first real introduction, the likes of Lady Snowblood.
Yes.
Female Prisoner Scorpion and the Stray Cat series. Now, they were probably considered much more exploitation films.
They would have been Japanese exploitation.
Yeah, Japanese, yeah.
And more of a 70s, 60s, 70s kind of thing.
Yeah, but it was girl gang.
Yeah.
That was something that, now I'll get into kind of gang culture and that kind of thing in Western things, but for me that was kind of the first introduction I had to females who weren't superheroes, that were just street kids who could kick a bit of ass, throw a knife, ride a motorcycle, and were just kind of badasses. Like there'd be girls that if you went out in the street you'd be like, oh fuck, stay away from, especially Michael Kaiji, who just had such a great presence.
Yeah, of course.
But she had, in Lady Snowblood, she was great. She had samurai skills, she's slicing and dicing, she was a great action star. But that's a little bit later. When did it really, really start? And who in Hong Kong was that kind of like first big female action star in Hong Kong?
Well, it goes way back. Now it's going back to a period that I wouldn't know names as such, because it would have been way before, even before the 60s, because 50s even had a very strong female-led presence in the movies in Hong Kong.
These
and
films
China
that unfortunately just have got lost.
A lot
in
of
time.
them have got lost, which is quite unfortunate. I mean, you're really talking the 60s really coming in there with the Shaw Brothers stuff.
And who were the main women kind of during that period?
I don't want to say names because I'm probably not going to pronounce them correctly, but from that you would have had the likes of I want to say Shizu. I am going to pull names out now.
He's going to have to pull names out here, folks.
I want to get them correct. But they would have been already, and this is what makes me wonder why Hollywood took
This looks
so
like
long.
a fabulous book. I'm sorry, George has just pulled out
It
the
is.
greatest book of all time. It looks like one that I definitely want to read.
It is amazing. So, keep talking. Let's see.
Well, I suppose then while you're kind of searching for names, we can talk about the kind of evolution in the Western world of women in action.
Yes.
And that kind of, so bringing women in action roles into television. So I was saying about the TV roles of the women of Charlie's Angels. We had Jacqueline Smith and Tanya Roberts and, Cheryl Ladd all playing these angels who were crime fighters, but they were put into situations where they had to be like on roller skates or in swimsuits or in modelling competitions,
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Again, sexually
Whereas
driven.
you never, that's the thing with Kung Fu cinema, even back then, you never saw that. Nobody was really, I mean, obviously there was women that played prostitutes throughout and whatnot.
Yes, yeah.
But in terms of their fighters, their warriors, they were never sexualized as such.
No. I've never seen once. I mean, I've seen Naked Weapon. And
oh,
things like
I mean,
that
yes, that's totally that's about being sexualized.
Yes, but it's knowingly sexualized.
Yes,
that is almost, I wouldn't say tongue-in-cheek because they are graphically brutal films.
Oh, yeah.
But it's almost like a kind of poking fun at the fact that what people, and maybe this was something that Hong Kong did, I don't know, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but it's almost like Hong Kong seeing what the Americans were doing with like Charlie's Angels and stuff, and it's like they think that women need to be like this. Well, here we'll show you a film where women are going to be women are going to be naked.
Yes,
they're going to be sprawled all over the show, but they are going to kick the bad
guys'
ass.
And this is why I think I can understand what Hong Kong were thinking. Hollywood, from every stage of the game, have always been hailed as the greatest filmmakers, and. When you have a filmmaker in Hong Kong who's made something incredible, and yet their film is shunned when it comes to the West over something as ridiculous as, well, let's say, what's a female-led general 80s action movie from Hollywood? I can't even know. This is my point. But even something that's male-driven.
Yes.
That doesn't even top what Hong Kong are delivering in terms of an action movie from females, you can understand why Hong Kong filmmakers would laugh at that or get angry about it or want to take the piss out of what Hollywood are offering.
Yeah.
It just doesn't make sense. So jumping back to the 60s there, I forgot, and now I've seen them, obviously they're coming to mind. You have the likes of Ivy Ling, who again was an early 60s star, Cheng Pei Pei, who we talked about, started in the early 60s. Helen Ma as well. She also, you would have seen her in the likes of Fate of Lee Can, Back Alley Princess, Deaf Mute Heroine. Hellgate was one of her earliest ones.
Okay.
Chow Chow. A lot of these would have started with Shaw Brothers and Shizu, who, again, my first introduction to Shizu is and was Legend of the Seven Golden Vampires.
Okay.
The crossover from Shaw Brothers to Hammer, they did a couple of co-productions.
Yeah. And
this one was Peter Cushing going to China to take on the vampires. It was, I love it. I mean, it is still one of my all-time faves. But I saw that as a very young kid, probably 8, 9, 10, and that stuck with me. And Shizu was pretty much the only female fighting character in it, apart from a love interest for Peter Cushing's, I think his son, his love interest. But I mean, she was the one that was kicking the ass. She was the one that was looking good. She was the one that was putting anyone else around her to shame for what she was given. Yeah. And then you have the likes of Lily Lee, and then you would hit the 70s where Angela Mao Ying came into action, who really, for me, was one of the ultimate. As much as I love Cheng Pei Pei, and she is one of the top female on-screen fighters of all time, I think Angela Mao Ying really took things to the next level and really showed the Kung Fu world she meant business. Yes. She obviously then, I suppose, more commercially became recognised as Bruce Lee's sister in Enter the Dragon. In that scene where she gets attacked and raped. But yeah, she for me was one of the finest, one of the top, and she went on to star in so much. And then you had the likes of Judy Lee, who followed her into the 70s and went on to do some amazing stuff. But there is so many. Of course, Polly Shang Kwan, how could I forget about her? She was amazing too. That's the thing. This wasn't a case of like Hollywood were struggling to find names.
No.
With Hong Kong and Taiwanese cinema, you're struggling to remember names.
Yeah.
Because there's so many. And, you know, any amount of these movies around us, I would say 90% of them have a female character in there that is kicking ass.
And the only female that I can think of from the 70s who I would say is an action star is Pam Grier.
Yeah, I suppose.
Foxy
actually.
Brown, Freddie Foster. Now, they were blaxploitation films.
Yes.
But they were very action heavy. You know, you had, obviously Pam Grier originated kind of in the kind of Roger Corman Women in Prison films.
Yes.
That's where she started. But she did move on to those kind of female action films. Now, they're low budget. So they were independently made. And that was, you know, that was one of your questions. You know, what about independently made kind of films and action films, you know? And those kind of in the 70s would have been the ones that were primarily successful, would have been those ones with Pam Grier. So for me, the first real action heroine of the Western world was Pam Grier.
Oh, interesting.
Because she did the most in terms of the action genre. Of course. Everybody who ever seen a poster with Pam Grier, anybody ever knows who Pam Grier is. Freddie Foster, Foxy Brown, Coffee, all of those films were action films. She had a gun on the front, and it wasn't just for sales. You know, the posters may have been designed where, she's busty, she's buxom, you know, she's famously Foxy Brown, she's a whole lot of woman. You know that expression, you know, I'm a whole lot of woman. You know, so yes, they knew that there was sexuality that played into that, but she was still a real badass. You know, she was going in, she was taking down the bad guys. You know, she wasn't bullshitting about. You know, she was going in and she was knocking them down. But she wasn't an action star like the East.
Yes,
these were women who could fight. Not only sorry, they could act first and foremost, because that's the most important thing about being an actor. Is that you can act,
and a lot of those
move.
This is the thing. A lot of those actresses in the East were brought up, trained in the Peking opera schools, like Jackie Chan, Sammo Hung, Yuen Biao were, and that then give them music lessons, singing, flexibility, fighting, acting. So it was very much a performance school of its time.
We know this because I mean, we know that in Korea, in China, in Japan, they have their idol schools.
Of course.
You know,
today that's the modernized version of it. Whereas, but these were women that, like one name in particular stands out to me is Young Pan Pan, who's known as Sharon Young, and she went from doing, kind of being hailed as the female Jackie Chan, doing these incredible traditional kung fu movies, adapting into modern day action films such as Angel Terminators, Princess Madam with Moon Lee. I mean, stuff that is fucking,
who we're going to talk about,
who is fucking
during this.
Amazing. But that's my point, is she, much like Jackie, moved with the time. Now, yes, she didn't get, I don't think she got the right projects as such, and perhaps retired a little too early before she then just became a producer. But she really kicked ass. Like, I mean, phenomenally so.
We can talk lots about Moon Lee during this.
But that's what I mean. Sharon Young was very much a young kung fu starlet who really was doing something. Again, today there's no real Hollywood actress or Western actress actress that is really jumping out at me.
But here's the thing. What you've just said there kind of reinforces a point that in the East, women were very much seen equally. Whether that is the case, I don't know about like Chinese oppression and women. I know about the bandaging the feet and things like that in the past.
Well, that's it's a lot.
But in terms of film and the chance to, I suppose, become masters of every craft. You know, they were getting singing lessons, acting lessons, martial arts lessons. So they were being treated kind of in the same way that they were able to do all these things and been trained to do all these things, which made them bankable stars.
Yep.
So they could be put into a lead role. They could just be a normal woman who could fight. You know, and that was the thing. It doesn't take, well, it does take much because I've lifted a gun and trust me, they're not easy to fire. But to lift a gun and point it at someone is very different to having the flexibility of actually being able to fight.
Yeah.
You know, and that's what action to me is.
Yeah.
Is to put yourself in a situation that is dangerous. It's about survival. It's about being smart. It's about being powerful, about making your timing right. And I see that a lot in the films that you're introducing me to. These Eastern films, is that these women are clever. You know, they're using their brains,
well, a lot
and
of
their
the time
bodies
as well,
in a very, very different way to what we'd say in
they're
the West.
also I wouldn't even say equal. They're almost even smarter than their male counterparts in the movies. You know, like there's no hiding the fact that these are talented people. You know, but then sorry, I was talking about somebody. There's nobody in the West that's really proven themselves. I'm talking Hollywood actresses there. Of course, you had the likes of Cynthia Rothrock, who was a champion of martial arts, and that's when she was then spotted by casting directors from Hong Kong, brought over, and the thing with that, she knew her moves, she knew her styles, her forms, but she was also under the eye of skilled Hong Kong directors that made her who she was then, you know.
But that was something she had to go there to break here.
Yeah.
So she had to make her break in an Asian action film because it was more accessible there for her to be an action star.
To be the kick-ass cop and to be this hardened fighter that
absolutely
was just seen as any other male counterpart would be in a Hollywood movie.
But that she needed that in order for people over here to take her seriously as an action star. So, you know, yes, she's an American woman who went over there to get her break before she got a break here. Now, her break here wasn't massive because
I think when she returned back to the West, that's when her career started to,
unfortunately,
go downhill.
Well, that's probably because of the films. Again, this is the thing with the West. The films that she was being offered here
and again,
weren't matching the ones that she was being offered
it's like Tony Jaa, for example. You know, when he launched, I know he was in movies before On Back, but On Back was his movie. This was the introduction to the world of Tony Jaa. For me, that was the greatest movie he's ever made. And I said, watching that in the cinema, I remember saying right after it, how is he going to top that? And everything he's made after it has just been okay.
Blah. Yeah.
And the same with Cynthia.
Iko Uwais as well.
Yeah.
Modern
of course.
star, you know, does the Raid.
Step out of the Raid, and that's it.
Absolutely amazing. And then kind of
that's my point. Is Cynthia was shown to her, I guess, full potential in Hong Kong, allowed to deliver some incredible fight scenes. I mean, they were amazing. And then her sort of early 90s to mid 90s return to Hollywood and more independent Western movies as such, although still studio led, would be directors trying to still, much like they did with Jackie Chan in the 80s, wanting to make him more of a Clint Eastwood than a Jackie Chan. They wanted to kind of like take the Hong Kong side. Oh, that was me this time.
George's phone's not on silent.
Take the Hong Kong side out of Cynthia and make it more of a Hollywood action
Americanize her again.
Yes, and it just... No, she still managed to pull off some decent moves.
Yeah.
But the energy wasn't there. The energy in her fights, the energy in the story, the energy in the pacing of the movie, it just wasn't there. And that, you know, it's almost like only in the last 10 years has Hollywood caught on to this. The last 20 years possibly.
But what they're doing, though, still is just hiring actresses and training them. You know, these are not skilled fighters. They're not women who have seen combat in any way, shape or form or been trained. They're trained for a specific movie to a specific fight sequence, and that's just how it is with women in America. It's unfortunate. Now, I'll get to it later on in the conversation, but you do have the likes of women like Gina Carano coming from an MMA background and then being moulded into an actress.
Yeah, but
not
then
a great one.
I can say the same thing with Hong Kong, where you have the likes of Cynthia Khan and Michelle Yeoh and Moon Lee, who were dancers.
Yes, but they were able to be trained because they had a background where they
Movement,
could move.
A background of movement, not stunt work, which they obviously got into massively, but
and threw themselves into that stunt work like unbelievably. But watching them on film, and I've said this often to you, whenever you watch an Asian action film, the camera is quite static through it kind of moves with the action.
The older ones, the camera is part of it.
Yes, it's moving along with them, so you can see that it's not a double most of the time. Anyway.
Most of the time.
You can see, wow, that person's really doing it. In Hollywood action, there's a lot of edits to kind of hide the fact that maybe Scarlett Johansson can do this flip, but there's one thing, throwing herself out the window or off a balcony while it's exploding behind her.
Or even something as small as kicking someone in the head. That can often be cut 3 different ways to make it look impactful, but also takes away from the fact that actress did it. Yeah. You know, it's unfortunate.
And that is an unfortunate thing about American films still now, is that they're still making those cuts and those edits that we're questioning, even though they're coming on, they're doing interviews with the likes of Jonathan Ross, Graham Norton, James Corden, whoever. They're coming on, they're talking about all the training that they had to go through. Yeah. And then you're kind of like, but I want to see it more in full force rather than this choppy editing. Well, it's not choppy, because choppy makes it sound bad. But this kind of hard editing that kind of cuts away so much that you're like, did she do that? Yeah. Or was there a double edit?
But again, this is my I guess gripe with that is the fact that, 30 years before what they're being praised for doing now in Hollywood, they were doing it without choppy editing back in Hong Kong.
So if we go back to the 80s, because then we can talk about Moon and Yukari. Back to the 80s, on the western side you had Andy Sedaris, Babes, Bombs and Bullets. He was famous for doing those films where he was bringing women again into action roles. Very, very low budget, cheesy action films. If you've ever seen the likes of Savage Beach and, all of those. Yeah. They were always in their bikinis with huge machine guns. They weren't fighting. They were just blowing stuff up. And that was acceptable. That was accessible to a male audience. Because what the male could do was go along to an Andy Sedaris film, sit there and almost get off on the fact that these women are scantily clad and they're shooting guns. There's no real skill involved there. But at the same time,
it's almost comical at the same time.
It can be. Yeah, they are. They're cheesy, comical action films. But the mindset then in the East, whenever we look at 80s action films in the East and the films that you've been showing me with women like Moon Lee, Yukari Oshima, Cynthia Khan, Anita Moy. There is an Anita Loy as well, isn't there?
They should be out there somewhere. You're thinking of Elaine Loy.
I can never get them two right. Watching them women who are just in get-ups, they're in their army gear or they're in their police uniforms and they're jumping over cars, they're kicking people, they're doing high kicks, they've got their handguns, but mostly they're kicking, their guns are being kicked out of their hands after they blow up half an island, then they lose their gun and it's all hand-to-hand combat.
Yes, exactly.
And
without, they know what they're doing.
Yes, without them being half naked.
Yes.
And without them needing the man to save them at the end of the day, or without having to really need the assistance of a male to get to the end result. They can do it very much on their own.
Yeah. No, it's very true. And that's, I guess, why Hollywood kind of doesn't impress me as much as it impresses the next person. Because I've really seen the most amazing amount of films from Hong Kong since I was 5-6 years of age, and they've continuously blown me away, and I just really could not pull a Hollywood or Western movie into my top 100 to bump one of these out, because it just wouldn't have a reason to. And they can continuously praise their Jolies and their whoever's for being these wonderful female action stars, but they're not. They're actresses.
They're actresses, yeah, who are just trained a little bit in how to move through a certain scene.
Whereas,
well, what about the likes of Moon and Yukari Oshima and Michelle Yeoh, you know, all of those actresses and Cynthia. The two Cynthias.
Yeah.
What, you know, talk me through kind of what that, watching kind of, growing up in a Western country and watching the two simultaneously, talk me through what it was like witnessing, and did you notice at the time the kind of variation and difference of how women were perceived in action films at that time?
I think so. I think more so because I was younger. I was just really watching these on an entertainment level.
Yeah.
I mean, for me, my earliest, I can't even say my earliest introduction to a Hong Kong female, it would have been Cynthia Rothrock, because her movies would have been promoted and sold here
stores.
more so because obviously there was a Western face to push.
Now, and she could speak English.
Yeah, and also she wasn't, some of the time she wasn't necessarily the lead of the movie, she was just in the movie, the likes of Top Squad and stuff. Oh, yeah. But thinking back to it, you had the likes of females, you know, appearing in Police Story 2 who would be kicking ass. You had who
is that wonderful actress in City Hunter? The cop girl.
Oh, Ching Mi. This is her here, Ching Mi Yu.
Is this her? Fantastic,
from
wonderful
Naked Killer.
Yeah. Wonderful mover, wonderful actress. Had some great fight sequences in a Jackie Chan film.
Yeah,
you know, but
that's what I mean. There's so many of them, and they're all over. But I think definitely Cynthia Rothrock would have been probably my earlier, in terms of a modern female action star of Hong Kong, would have been Cindy. And then, of course, you had Above the Law, also known as Righting Wrongs with Yuen Biao, directed by Corey Yuen Kwai, who highlighted an amazing fight scene between Rothrock and Karen Shepard, another American martial artist. Yes, and while they were doubled artfully in the bigger stunts, it was still a phenomenal fight scene. But even that one scene alone, for me, totally deletes anything Hollywood have given in terms of an action starlet. Oh, fuck, it's phenomenal. But, you know, it's just like after that, Michelle Yeoh really came into play for me. You know, Police Story 3 was released on VHS in the mid-90s. But I think I'd already had movies of hers. I'm nearly sure I had movies of hers. But I also had, like, Cynthia Khan in Tiger Cage 2 and in The Line of Duty 4. So I was already seeing these people. Moon Lee, I'm trying to think, the first Moon Lee movie I think I saw was Iron Angels.
Superb. Yeah,
and that was obviously her and Yukari Oshima and Elaine Loy. But that is what I would say really woke me up to the female, the femme fatale genre and Girls and Guns was in Hong Kong. That was it. And at that time period then, Made in Hong Kong, VHS label and Eastern Heroes started releasing everything that then made it more accessible to get more of these women in action.
But isn't it funny that it couldn't just be, I mean, you kind of proved another point, is that it couldn't just be a Yukari Oshima action film. No. It was Girls with Guns to encourage people to watch. It was femme fatale genre to encourage people to watch.
But that's what the West were selling it as. Yeah. That was their labelling of this. Where I guess in Hong Kong they were just seen as the latest Moon Lee movie, the latest Yukari Oshima movie. And often these girls were all starring together, which made it, whereas Hollywood you would probably, bar the, I guess, the Charlie's Angels remakes. In Hollywood, you would only have one real female hero. You know, like you would, if it was an action movie, it was just her on her own. But with Hong Kong movies, you had 2, 3, 4 of these women that could all kick ass. So it wasn't just one; it was all of them. Yeah. And that's what made it even more incredible and more exciting. I mean, there's so much here I want to show you that absolutely. You still haven't seen.
No, I know.
That will blow your mind, you know, of what they can do. But But yeah, there's something special about it.
Yes.
And there's something that never even, well, it's not in my nature anyway to divide sexes or race, anything else like that. But I never looked at these movies and went, oh, that's a woman, they shouldn't be in this role. It just, to me, it was just an incredible actress who could fight like Jackie Chan and do some incredible stunt work, and that blew me away. Yeah,
I think there's a lot of, I mean, you touched on a point there that, it was what it was, so it just, you accepted it. And I think maybe it's kind of a bit of a turn to be then talk why women in action. And the whole purpose of me wanting to talk about it was because how strongly I feel about women in tough roles, especially action roles, and seeing them in that, and watching the likes of, whenever you've introduced me to Moonlight and you carry out my films, and watching those movies, I just take them for what they are, which is really, really good action films. And it's a bonus to me that these are women, who are just kind of like, doing what every man does in every action film, and it's not questioned. It's not it's not a big deal. It's just a day-to-day thing. It's just part of who they are and part of the life that they live. Yeah. And
when you think about it, when you see in a Hollywood movie, when a police squad arrives at the scene of a crime, it's all men. It's all men. In their caps and their guns and their bulletproof vests. In a Hong Kong movie, when the police squad arrives at the scene, it's a mixture of plainclothes men and women with a gun, and mostly the women that run into the action to take take charge. That's, for me, is how it should be. But you just don't see that.
I think in the West, we were in the 90s, it was starting to change a little bit, because what we were getting then was video games became hugely popular. So we were getting Street Fighter, Mortal Kombat, Tomb Raider. Exactly. Now these were, again, it's not quite film. It did lead to film adaptations. Of course, but it was, again, an interesting step in the evolution of women in action for me. Whenever I kind of research it and look back on it, this kind of evolution of women in action, it is primarily about accessibility, and how do you, as a producer or as a marketing person, how do you market that woman? And that's what the West is about. It's a big marketing strategy. Of course it is, because there seems to be this real cognitive dissonance between reality and fiction. So we can't seem to blend the two together to make it acceptable in our own realities and in our own worlds, because we have grown up in places where sexuality, gender, race, religion has all been segregated throughout our entire lives. So whenever you look into it and you see this kind of women in action kind of becoming a bigger thing, it stems from the East. And whenever I looked into, obviously, because Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat and Tekken come from the East. Yeah, of course. I mean, if you walk down any street in Tokyo, you can see. Well, I have. So, I've been, and I know what it's like. So they're bringing these things over, which over there is completely normal. It's completely, it's not an issue. It's completely satisfactory to have a woman in those roles. Yeah. And you find that with the characters like Sonya Blade, Katana, their costumes maybe were a little bit questionable. Their boots were maybe a little bit enhanced. Yeah. But it was, they were good characters to pick. And whenever I started playing those games, those were the characters I went for. I went for the women. Because I was more, I think, attracted to the fact that a female could be tough. Even as a man, I was so, I guess, conditioned to see men as action heroes, and conditioned to see men as the tough people. Of course. That because I grew up in a woman with a... because I grew up with a woman. I did grow up with a woman. In a woman? Well, I did. That's how I started life. But because I grew up in a household where there was a woman who was strong and in control of the household, for me, getting the opportunity to choose a character that was female to kick a man's ass, even for me as a male, was exciting. This was before I grew into my own sexuality even, so it was just something that I really enjoyed. And then you get Tomb Raider, who was more of an acrobatic hero.
Yes.
She was guns, but she could fight and
But
she
it
could
was a
move,
very
and she was
Western
smart.
thing.
It was a very Western thing because
Yeah.
she was hypersexualized.
Yeah.
She had to have the shorts. She had to have the gigantic breasts.
Yeah.
She had to have all of that. But it started to make it a little bit more accessible. But what they weren't doing was taking away the sexuality. And a woman's sexuality should never be taken away from her. Don't get me wrong. That's not the point that I'm trying to
But
make.
in terms of promoting it as such.
Yes. It's how they're promoted, how they're marketed, is it has to be marketed sexually to an audience for it to be acceptable. In the East, when I look at that and these kind of things, they weren't marketed in that way.
Apart from Naked Killer.
Well, apart from these kind of, those kind of films, were marketed in that way. But what is more interesting is that they just kind of would put someone's face on a poster and it would automatically be accepted that, oh, Moonley's got a new movie out, the way we would do with Robert Downey Jr.
It's usually
or
just
Bruce Willis
them
or
in a pose with guns, bulletproof vests on, or jumping out of an explosion. There was nothing.
Or on their motorcycles or something.
Yeah, there was
but
nothing
they looked...
to sort of just say this is a sexy movie.
Yeah, whenever you look at posters for like Iron Angels, Avenging Quartet, Inspectors Wear Skirts, and even the title alone, Inspectors Wear Skirts, you would think, weird.
Yeah.
But then when you look at those posters, they are very generic. They follow a very generic tone that was in Eastern, how Eastern posters were created. I mean, a lot of Eastern posters I see, I find very hard to differentiate sometimes which movie's which.
Yes,
because they have a very streamlined look.
Yeah.
And that's the point, that there was no streamlining in Western culture of women in action or women in general. But we're talking about women in action, so there was no streamlining of that because they had to promote it in a way that appealed to the male fantasy of what a woman should be.
Yes, of course. Yeah. It's unfortunate.
It is unfortunate.
And it's unfortunate that it really hasn't changed
today,
in a sense of how they sell the movie.
Yes, I mean, we're seeing it changing a little bit. There's women kind of taking control. So I suppose we could, before, I don't know how much time there is left on our battery.
We're good.
We're talking a lot. But I suppose we could kind of get into the more modern sensibilities. You had the likes of, what I also find really funny, George, sorry, I have to say, I watch any kind of Eastern action film where there's a woman fighting and watch a Western film. Western women always fight with really, really high shoes.
Oh, yeah.
I was watching the Nikita show with Maggie Q. Love her. Great mover. Great actress.
Again, started in Hong Kong.
Yeah, started in Hong Kong. Fantastic actress. I really, really like her. But had been watching the Nikita series. And nearly every fight sequence where she's out, she's in this gorgeous dress. Yeah. But she's got high heels on.
Of course.
And I'm like, who can fight in those? Obviously, Maggie Q can.
It's a sexualized.
Yes,
thing.
It's like it's the femininity of how she looks.
Yeah,
and I'm thinking to myself, she looks fab. She looks amazing. She's out there, in her gorgeous gown and her gorgeous shoes and her hair all done and whatever. And she never looks a mess at the end of the fight.
No,
but why couldn't she just go in there in a pair of jeans and just start fucking kicking people's asses? That would have been so much more fun.
And that's the difference you see in a lot of Hong Kong movies. That the females are flat shoed, like trainers, or we actually ready to fight. We
watched Iron Angels 3 recently. And there was the same with Moonley on the train.
Yes.
And she's in a long skirt. She's kind of gaudy. She's like bookwormy.
Yes, she is. Yeah.
But she's in flat shoes. She's in practical fucking shoes.
Because she knows she's going to kick ass.
Yeah. Whereas Maggie Q steps out of her limousine in 10-inch heels and is like, well, I know that some shit's going to go down here,
but I'm okay
because
I can keep my balance.
I can stand on one leg and kick someone 60 million times with this 10-inch heel on. That's always something I find really humorous about action films with women in America. Because primarily if they want to get them into an action film, they've got to be wearing the highest shoes, the shortest skirt,
but it's so unnatural.
It is, and it does. I mean, it makes for. Don't get me wrong. It makes for a very impressive looking sequence whenever women are dressed like that, and they look beautiful and whatever. But it does look very unnatural. It looks like something that no person in regular life could actually do. Yeah, like no woman.
I mean,
could
actually,
just go out
on that note, I must point out, like, I think it was in Salt that Angelina Jolie, which I think is a great movie in terms of action for Angelina Jolie, where she takes her heels off because she knows she's about to get into some action. Yeah. And that made sense. But you don't see that often. You don't see that.
But we're starting to see this clear change now, I think, as we're moving forward and we're progressing, we're starting to see a big change, because you think about Charlize Theron in Atomic Blonde, you think about Jessica Chastain coming out with the 355, you know, and seeing the trailer for that, and they all, you know, look like they're in practical wear, you know, like they're in trousers or, you know, something that they can move quite freely in. We haven't seen the film yet. It's supposed to have been out, but it's not coming out next year. But we're starting to see women almost be like, no, we can be one of the men. We don't need to be a Bond girl in the West to make it.
Or dress like a hooker to kick
Or
ass.
dress like a hooker, we can just be plain jeans. I don't want to offend anybody, but we can just look like women.
But you see that very much with Johansson as the Black Widow.
Yes.
When you see her dressed to the nines, there's a point to it. Mm-hmm. But again, I think that's someone who removes her shoes when she's about to get into action.
Oh, yeah.
But then most of the time you see her dressed in a way that you know she's going to be fighting, and she knows it's going to be awkward wearing heels. Yeah,
I mean that introduction to Scarlet in Avengers Assemble or the Avengers in the America, she's on a chair, you know, she's tied to the chair, she's barefoot. And, you know, she's obviously on the phone. She's like, can you just give me a second? She beats them down in her bare feet perfectly and then lifts her heels.
Yes,
and it's holding her
right.
heels. You know,
yeah.
You know, you could see even, you know...
But you know that...
and this is actually interesting, because although Joss Whedon is getting a lot of slack, who I have not talked about in action...
Yes.
...is Buffy.
Yeah.
Hello, guys and girls.
But again...
That was the first...
That was
my first she was a superhero, so she had extraordinary power. So again, it's all about accessibility. Why couldn't she just be a good fighter?
And that was inspired by Hong Kong action.
Yeah, well, of course it was.
Yeah.
But Buffy was always practical. She looked great. She did fight in heels at times.
Yes.
But a lot of the time she's out in boots.
Yeah.
You know, because she's having to walk the streets of Sunnydale at night.
Yes.
To fight vampires. You know, she's not going to be wanting to be out in her mini skirts.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of the time she's in a woolly hat and a jumper and she's kicking ass. Now, obviously, Sarah Michelle Gellar eventually ended up doing a lot of her own stunts as the series progressed, and she ended up getting her Taekwondo yellow belt, I think. Or she did do quite well, so she was able to do more of the stunts practically. But as much as people may hate Joss Whedon for what he's done, you know, in terms of, you know, race and whatever,
that's a past thing.
He created... What he did was he created a female action hero for the West that was completely and utterly accessible to a Western audience for them to accept. Buffy was a normal high school... She may have had extraordinary strength and whatever, but she was a high school girl. She went through the trials and tribulations that every teenager has to go through, every young adult has to go through, loss, grief, and all of this here. I've talked about this with you. Is it because, and you see it with Alias as well, Jennifer Garner, Sidney Bristow in Alias, you know, now she had no extraordinary power, she was just a really good spy, and she did fight in heels quite a lot. But why was that never, why was that kind of image of women in action never translated to film? And I said this to you, is it because people feel that women are more complex and they need a deeper story to make people accept them, that to accept that they're able to kick ass? So whereas with a man we just accept that he can do it.
Yes,
like Bruce Willis, we can just accept that he can go into the Nakatomi Plaza and start blowing shit up, and that's totally fine. Had Mrs. Nakatomi came bombing him with guns, you know, would people have been like,
put John McClane up against Moon Lee from Iron Angels.
Oh, should have killed him. Should have killed him. And that's the thing. Do people think that women need more of a story to make it more accessible to them? What do you think?
I think you're right. I think in the West.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, definitely. I think so. Whereas in the East, it was kind of, as we've already covered, it's acceptable that they're just as equal as the male cop or the male character of the story. But yeah, I think that would have been a major, I guess, holdback for female characters in the West.
Xena,
Buffy, but this was all later.
This is all later 90s
stuff.
Into early noughties.
Yeah. So that influence of Hong Kong was already hitting, because there was a big drive in the early to mid 90s. It kind of started, this Hong Kong craze really started, and then Jackie
Well, that's the decade I grew up in, and I was seeing him everywhere.
Yeah, so Jackie was
video
really hitting Hollywood at that stage with Rumble in the Bronx and so on and so on. And that's when Hollywood really started feeding off Hong Kong. Yes, they wanted to release more, although they fucked up a lot of edits and changed a lot of things. But well, there's no but, they shouldn't have done it. No. But they wanted, for me, that was them wanting to see what was out there. And adapting to the style of the action that was then starting to take over the world. Yeah. Although the world had already, bar America, the world had already been watching it and knowing about it.
But again, what they were doing was they were casting men.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
In an action film.
Well, so
we were getting Seagal, Van Damme, Chuck Norris. We were getting men in these roles.
Of course. Yeah.
But so those types of films, you would have looked in the East and seen those types of films with Yukari Oshima, Moon Lee, Cynthia Camp, Michelle Yeoh. But still in the West, it was still very male dominated.
Oh, yeah, of course.
And when you wanted a tough woman who could kick ass, she had to be some kind of superheroine or spy or whatever.
Yeah.
She couldn't just be a normal martial artist who loses her mother and goes on an act of revenge. For me, that's why
Cynthia Rothrock never became a Hollywood star.
Because people couldn't accept that.
They couldn't accept that she was tougher. I think that was a major part of why...
Do you think that the system oppressed her?
I think so. I think had she been naturally selected as Sonya Blade for the Mortal Kombat movie, it may have helped. But I also believe that her career in Hong Kong and what she was able to do scared a lot of the male action stars of Hollywood. I think it really did. Because she would have come in and shown them how it was done. Without a doubt.
It's so funny because it's such a testosterone-driven environment in the West to the East, where you're seeing a parallel of women and men just working alongside each other in these films and in their own roles. So women dominating one film, men dominating another film, and then concurrently or adjacently, to each other.
Yeah.
And you're right. She probably frightened a lot of these major male action stars who were bringing in a lot of dollar.
Yep.
And they were like, nah. So they oppressed her in crappy, made straight-to-video films.
Straight-to-video films, yeah. Now, for me, though, a lot of those, kind of were watchable and fun. But when she started with Richard Norton, I mean, those for me were the more exciting.
That was China O'Brien and China O'Brien.
China O'Brien, well, yeah, but they were kind of Golden Harvest productions, but the likes of Rage and Honor, and all those, and that series and a few others. To see them two on screen, because they've worked in Hong Kong for so long together as well, they had that equal chemistry, and that worked, and that both of them should have been bigger. They should have been doing much more. But I do think that most Hollywood action stars were quite nervous. There was rumours of her working with Stallone on a project and things like that, but it never
came to fruition.
No, it didn't. Yeah. And I mean, the Hollywood action hero is a special breed, because it's all made to look impressive, whereas the Hong Kong action hero is real.
Yes.
Because they didn't have what Hollywood had to cover up the falseness of
they didn't have the budget.
No, they didn't, or the CGI or anything special. Which is why most of the Hong Kong stars and filmmakers are phenomenal people for what they have achieved and done. But yeah, I think personally, I think Cynthia should have stuck around in Hong Kong. Although I know it was a hard gig for her. It was hard to.
Did she know the language? Did she learn?
Not so much. Okay. I don't believe she did. Only little bits.
Okay.
But they would dub her quite obviously.
Oh yeah.
Or tell her lines on the spot, and then she would repeat those lines.
So phonetically learn how to say things.
Yeah. But I think had she stuck around in Hong Kong, it would have got even better. Yeah. I think her move back to the West was at the wrong time. It was at a period of movie making that I wasn't, again, I wasn't a fan of the mid-90s kind of stuff anyway. But, and I don't think
neon-soaked action sets.
Yeah, but it was also very drab in terms of ideas, costumes, set design. It was a very drab time for film, I think. And then the kind of turn of the century kind of started to change that a wee bit. But at that stage, then you had, Hollywood's love for Hong Kong. They started bringing all the directors, and they wanted to show them how they did this wire stuff so they could steal it.
Yeah,
basically. And then one of the biggest films to use that was the Charlie's Angels remakes. Obviously, you had the Matrix, the Crouching Tigers. Carrie-Anne Moss did amazing as a woman of action in the Matrix movies.
Great action,
phenomenal. And the training that she did go through under Yuen Woo-ping was real.
Yeah,
it was
I've watched the behind the scenes, and I've seen what she went through.
And that was amazing.
And although it's wires and it supports the flips and it supports the walks and the walls,
still
and
physically
she
doing
physically
it.
was really capable. I mean, I've been on wires. Where in gymnastics, and when like in gymnastics, when you're on a wire and you're first learning how to do flips and stuff, and they're uncomfortable, and it takes a lot of core strength.
Well, you can
to
imagine
yourself like that.
That's with the best of Hollywood stuff. But to go back 20 or 30 years into Hong Kong and know what they're dangling on a thin wire that could snap, which many have.
That they have to like smudge out. I had larger wires, ones that I could hold on to that wouldn't like slice me in two. And I'm having to do like flips and gymnastics
without
and it was
getting tangled.
Without getting tangled and without being out of breath. So it took an awful lot of core strength. It took a lot of strength in my legs to be able to do that with the support, so that we could eventually take the wires off.
Of course.
And then I was able to just naturally do the flips on the trampoline and whatever. But
you had, that's what I mean. You had. Yes,
and it was good training for
she wasn't traditionally trained,
so
it's understandable that she would to really impress under Yuen Woo-ping especially, she would have to go through some serious training, and she done that. Now the same for the girls in Charlie's Angels, Cameron Diaz, Drew Barrymore, and Lucy Liu. They were under the eyes of Yuen Woo-ping's brother Yoon Chung-yan, who directed the action in Charlie's Angels.
Wow, okay.
Now, for me, the Charlie's Angels movies, they're fun, but they're the wire work is so over the top.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
It's almost like, and that to me that wouldn't have been Yoon Chung-yan's decision, because he's been working in the business from the 60s. He knows what he's doing. For me, that was Hollywood saying, let's make this big,
make it more
wild,
emphasized.
Yes.
But would they have done that? So here's the question: would they have done that if it was men?
Oh, well, I mean,
so
honestly,
you look at The Matrix and
so.
How kind of fluidly it is. And it's got Keanu in the lead role, and it's got a lot of men. You know, it has got Carrie-Anne Moss in there, but it's quite fluid. Whereas you take the film Charlie's Angels, 3 women, is that, what do you think that was a case of? It's because it's girls, and it's because it's Cameron Diaz, Drew Barrymore, and Lucy Liu.
Yeah, there's a comical side
that
to it.
we need to maybe exaggerate the movements.
Well, you see, for me, I don't know. For me, Romeo Must Die great film, but some of the worst wire work Corey Ewan's ever produced.
Dreadful.
So over the top, yet again. And that, for me, is the producers in Hollywood saying, go wild, let's do this. We've never seen anything quite like this. Whereas we've been watching it, or I'd been watching it for, but you've decades
been watching
before.
Wire work that's very balletic.
Yes.
It's fluid. It's
more Crouching Tiger.
Yeah,
well,
but
again,
even
Crouching Tiger
didn't
wow it. I love it.
And it wowed
but
me.
But it didn't wow me because
yeah.
I'd already been watching this kind of thing. But yes, for me, this was Hollywood taking a big stick to beat down the bigger names of Hong Kong, to let them see they were still in charge and we can make you look bad.
Yeah,
I think that's what it was. But
with
with Charlie's
missed
Angels,
opportunity.
Oh, without
for
a
Charlie's
doubt,
Angels,
without a doubt,
that could have been a real modernised version of a show that was known as Jiggle TV.
I know, but they have McGee behind it.
They did have McGee behind it, which is an unfortunate thing. But it was a missed opportunity because they could have taken that whole Jiggle TV, and especially 3 women who at that time in Hollywood were dominating. Cameron Diaz and Drew Barrymore were 2 of the biggest stars. Lucy Liu was just coming off of...
Cameron Diaz looked incredible.
She looked amazing.
Doing the action.
She did, and she proved that with a little assistance, she could do it.
But there were still fight scenes that she had done there that really impressed.
Yeah.
But
it was the overabundance of comedy that let it down.
Of course it is.
It could have been a a girls' own adventure
Yes.
where they trained the three of them into. I know Lucy Liu had done some training in the past, fight training for things or whatever.
Yeah.
Or
well, what I was leading to with that was the.
Sorry, I apologize.
No, you're okay. What I was talking about was the women. You would have had, Hollywood had kind of taken the reins of bringing in Hong Kong directors and fight choreographers, but you then had the odd wee introduction of new Chinese faces, new Chinese women. And these aren't the ones that were impressing back in the East. These are the new faces. These are younger
like Zhang
faces.
Ziyi and
No,
or
she's
Zhang,
again a phenomenal martial artist
Yeah.
and actress, but a totally new face to the world of martial arts.
So they could utilize that in the West because she wasn't big in the East. So they were like, well, let's pluck her quick.
Yes.
Before they get their hands on her, almost.
And the same with, you had the likes of the Shanghai Noon movie with Jackie Chan and Owen Wilson,
and
where
Lucy
they brought in and Lucy Liu.
Yeah.
The Shanghai Nights, they brought in another Chinese actress to play his sister, and so on and so on. So
and they also had like the likes of Shikwi and
she got her introduction then with The Transporter, which is from Corey Ewan, one of his better Hollywood offerings because there wasn't as much wire work introduced to that. But then Jet Li needs wires, I suppose.
Now, George.
No. But again, my point is there that Hollywood were starting to realise what they'd missed for the last couple of decades and what Hong Kong were doing on a much, on 10 or 20% of the budget.
With what they were doing with their female
with
stars.
With real fighters, real action stars. And they wanted then to bring that in. So from that period, that kind of 10-year period of The Matrix, Crouching Tiger, Charlie's
Angels, between 99 to 2009.
Kill Bill, that kind of... I mean, Kill Bill was, again, utilised to a point with Uma Thurman really put through her paces.
Yeah.
And did very well.
She looked exhausted.
Yeah.
In some of those behind the scenes, she looked pretty
see,
knackered.
From that period, anything action related from Hollywood had a Hong Kong flair to it.
Yes. It needed wire work. It needed something that
it
was less
not
grounded.
Not so much even the wire work, the camera work. They started bringing in the angles, the movement. They wanted to. It could have been a whole new, I guess, band of producers that came in and thought, let's turn things around here. But Hollywood became Hong Kong, in a sense, from that decade, from those movies all came out. And then everyone was kicking ass and doing Hong Kong style martial arts.
Yeah.
Right up to today, where we see in the MCU, their heroes are fighting the way, now it's a very stylized version of Hong Kong.
Yes, absolutely.
Action, but it has taken that long for it to progress. And I suppose, in a sense, that's why the likes of Jackie Chan has stepped back from making massively stunt-orientated movies now. Well, yes, he's hitting 70 very soon in the next couple of years, but he's probably thinking, well, I can't challenge that now. I've always wanted to be in Hollywood. I've always wanted to show the world what I can do, and now they've taken that and they have the ability to up it necessarily.
But here's the thing. In terms of modern cinema, we do have trained martial arts women in the East. The likes of Selena Jade. I know she's British, but she's a trained martial artist.
Well, Selena is the daughter of Roy Horan, who is most famously known as the evil priest in Snake and the Eagle's Shadow.
No,
so her dad,
that's who her dad is.
Yes.
Wow, I did not know that.
Yeah. So she's grew up in a martial arts family, let's say.
Yeah.
So there is that there, and she is one of the newer stars.
She is a newer star, but she's there. She's been almost there long enough now for them to have been able to push her
at
as
least
a
the last
major
20 years at least.
Yeah, to push her as a major action star.
Yes.
And this is the thing. Whenever I see her move in the films where she's allowed and given that opportunity to, I'm like. Same with JJ Yanin and those kind of actresses. Whenever I see them move, I'm like, where are their lead where are their lead roles?
Yeah,
Who's in Chocolate? What do you call the actress that's in Chocolate?
Gigi Yannon.
No, it's not Gigi Yannon.
It is.
Is it Gigi Yannon? Oh, okay, Gigi. I thought it was somebody else. But you're seeing them and you're like, why are they not capturing this and making it just... and they fight so much for... there's so much fight for equality in every aspect of entertainment and life. For women and men to be treated equally, for sexuality to not be a problem, for gender to not be a problem, all of that. Yet we're still seeing oppression in the action genre specifically, where women are not being pushed into those roles and making it their career.
Well, even the last 20 years of Hong Kong cinema, it has changed phenomenally. It's become more Hollywood-like in a sense, and their
productions are getting bigger.
And, but there's also, it's more about the faces on the posters that are going to sell, and there isn't that really kind of rough independent action movie coming out of Hong Kong as much now, because they're not. It's a different breed of actor and actresses. There's nobody quite like Moon Lee and all those others today. I can't really. There's a handful, but they're not getting those. They're not getting those lead roles. But no studios are willing to make more lower budget projects with them. Everyone wants to focus on a bigger budgeted movie, and for that they need bigger stars.
Yeah.
So you still see, even though Michelle Yeoh's doing incredibly well in Hollywood,
she is. Yeah,
she still will step back into Hong Kong or China to do a martial arts movie because she knows the fans want it, and she is a name that will sell as a female fighter.
But this is where they're missing opportunities to bring in women who aren't credible. It'll maybe sound worse than what I mean it as, but that aren't credible actresses. Yes. So they need to maybe bring in women who have a bit of a name, but they're not like, they're not the Gong Li of Asia.
No,
they're the new Moon Lee.
Yeah.
And they need to be focusing on bringing that in. And I have such a passion for this. And I've often said to you, you're a filmmaker. I like to write. Let's write, female-based, film that mimics Iron Angels or Insider's Worst Scripts. Put a modern spin on it, but bring and maybe go through that effort as two people who are passionate about it. Go through that effort of finding a female who can fight and marketing her as an action star. Yeah. Because I think that's what we're missing today.
I think so.
In the modern
world. It's a genre for me that, let's call it the Girls with Guns Hong Kong genre, has gone.
No. But the martial arts hasn't.
No. Definitely not. But that particular breed of film, not even filmmakers or actresses, that breed of film has stopped.
But even making a film where it's Bruce Lee but a woman, just a martial arts film.
Yeah.
That is something that could be done very, very simply.
I mean, you're getting the odd one coming out that does do something like that with a kind of, not an unknown actress or such, but there's not enough.
Yeah.
Like what we were getting, like, in the 80s and 90s in Hong Kong, you were getting these 3 times a week.
Yes, yeah.
Now it's like, you're lucky if you get one a year.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's unfortunate, but
that's what we need. We need to, I think, as fans of movies, of people who like to see women in tough roles, I think, there's a responsibility there to kind of push that.
Yeah.
But it's become so much about the name and the status of their, of that name within Hollywood. And
it's a marketing thing.
Absolutely.
Movies aren't made anymore. But studios are not made anymore to entertain as such.
No.
They're made to make money.
Yeah. It's all about the grain, isn't it? Oh, well, I mean money grain. I'm doing money sign here. You can't see it because it's a podcast. Keep forgetting. Don't mean smoking grain. I mean like moolah. But that's the thing. It is a marketing thing. It is about getting established actresses and training them up a little bit to make them look like action stars. Whereas what we really need is that old style of
because I don't care for that. I mean, the amount of modern Hong Kong movies that try to push forward a new fighting female, they've always got to look almost like Hollywood are doing it. They've got to look good. Their hair's perfect when they're fighting. They're dressed so stylishly. They don't really take a hit like you would have seen 20 or 30 years ago. But
are you excited for seeing the likes of Olivia Liang, who's playing the new character in the Kung Fu reboot?
Oh yeah.
You know, are you looking forward to seeing things like that there?
Honestly, no.
No?
Honestly,
Is it because it's the CW? People seem to have a bit of a CW hatred.
No. I watched the trailer for it and I was
Yeah.
impressed. I was
Yeah.
expecting a lot worse. A lot worse. But will I rush to see it? No.
I'm only watching it because
I
it's
think
a female woman in a martial arts role.
It's very
in an
important
action role. That's
yeah. I mean, look, I think it does look impressive enough, but again, it's so just Hollywood looking, so flowery, and we've seen it. It looks
polished.
it looks like something that's just come out of the live action Mulan film.
It looks like something that's come straight out of the dishwasher.
Yeah, it's so
sparkly
clean.
and clean.
Yeah, and that doesn't impress me personally. It doesn't suit because for me that gritty. I mean, I would quicker go back to watching Angels.
Yeah,
Enforcers, Iron Angels, Princess Madam, Angel Terminators repeatedly before I would jump into a new show like that.
But I think it's important to know that women finally are maybe getting the same opportunities as men within the film world, that they are not subjected to the housewife
in the West.
In the West, what did I say?
But just generally.
Oh, sorry. I mean, in the West, probably primarily because obviously in the East we've discussed that it was just what it was. You know, that women and men were just both working. But in the West, it seems like there's now much more of an opportunity that women are the women themselves are speaking up. They're standing up. They're speaking for their own rights. They're pushing their own careers forward in the ways that they want to.
Yeah.
And the likes of Jessica Chastain, you know, bringing together a group of women for a female action film because she's like, well, why can't we? You know, is for me a really positive sign. You know, someone using their status to be like, let's bring together a bunch of women to kick ass in a film,
and give something a bit fresh,
and try and give the audience a film
for this
that yes, maybe about women, and it's sad that it's a thing that it's like an all female action film that we have to talk about it like that, but maybe to normalize females in action.
But you know how sad that is, like trying to sell it like that.
But that's what I mean. Absolutely. It's a sad thing that an all-female action film. It's like saying an all-Asian superhero cast. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
It shouldn't be a discussion we're having in 2021.
No.
But maybe having those initial discussions of, it's an all-female action movie. It's an all-Asian action film. Or it's whatever. An Asian-American film. Maybe that will help to normalise the approach towards how we see women in action in the future. And I suppose that's a nice way to end the podcast. Is that, you know, we've talked a lot about the history of it and how people have seen women in action over the years, and now this kind of movement, this forward movement of women taking control, speaking up, you know, not taking any more shit and driving their careers forward. It's a really good time to start normalizing women in action. We've normalized women in every other aspect of culture pretty much now, that why not normalize them in something that they should be able to do without being compared to a man. And that's I think action is the only genre that I can think where women are really subjected to that kind of scrutinization, where they're compared to the man more so than in any other film. And I think that's why I wanted to talk about women in action today, because I thought it was a good topic to talk about. There was a lot of history to it, a lot of depth to the conversation. That's
what I say. It could be done over a course of 7 podcasts.
I mean, we're kind of, maybe we will, if people react well to this, maybe we'll return and we'll talk about specifics, because we've jumped from characters and situations and movies and decades.
I think it'd be interesting to focus on perhaps a set of movies featuring said women.
Yes, we can certainly do that.
East versus West kind of thing, and you know, be interesting to see what we pull from that. Absolutely. Okay, well, that's been fun. Thank you very much.
Was that a long conversation?
It was. Let me just
Oh, George's having me.
An hour and 25 minutes. People
not
should still be awake.
Yeah, well, I think, do you know what? Hopefully we were engaging enough, and this, I said this, I want to reiterate this at the end of at least the first couple of podcasts. It's to show that George and I are actually, there are things that we're passionate about. We're not goofballs all the time.
No, not all the time.
And we do have a lot of information. We retain a lot of information. George has an extraterrestrial amount of knowledge. It's crazy. Much more knowledge than I would have, but
Stop.
No, you would. You retain it, and you're older than me, so that's the other
true.
thing. But it's a good opportunity for us to sit down, talk without having the pressure of the camera on us. Not that we mind the camera, but it's just it allows us to more freely talk about things and move, and kind of without losing focus on a camera, we can move and we can discuss and we can lean up and down.
We can naturally just talk about what we love,
what we do when we get together and just sit down. And to let people know that there's subjects that we like to talk about, there's subjects that we have a lot of knowledge on, that we're very, very passionate about, this being one of them. And hopefully that trend will continue in future podcasts.
Fingers crossed.
So thanks so much. We've got a list of things that we want to talk about on podcasts in the future. We don't know what the next one's going to be.
Surprise.
We literally just today, I was like, let's do Women in Action, because it was the one that I wanted to talk about.
Importantly.
Okay.
We'll be back next week with more, but obviously in between that, we've got our movie reviews, audiovisual commentaries, new episodes of Screen Queens, nice package. There's tons on the channel.
Yeah, and don't forget, this is the Celluloid Misfits coming in your ears.
Woo! Sticky moments.
Very.
But and we're available now on all...
We're on all platforms. We're on Spotify, we're on Amazon Music, we're on Google Music, we're on Podbean. We're anywhere that you can get your podcasts and music, we are there. And all you need to do, if you want to tell your friends, is just search in any of those platforms, the Celluloid Misfits. Shouldn't be a difficult one to spell for anybody out there, but it will be attached to every video.
Yes.
And on our Instagram page and on Facebook and whatever. And all you need to do is Celluloid Misfits will be the only thing that comes up, and you can start listening to our podcast on whatever platform you feel comfortable.
Delicious.
Yes.
All right.
So this will be up as soon as George gets it together. I'll be out there. I'll get on it.
I'll not sleep tonight.
No, you need sleep. But yes, so thanks. So once again, I'm Mark from Head Over Rails, and this is George from Movie Misfit. We are the Celluloid Misfits, and this is Two Poofs on our podcast.
Yay.
Join us again next time.
Cherry pie.
Outro music cue now.
Very good.